Hello YouTube, this video is about this big hole here. I think it's time we address the firewall. In order to work on the firewall we need to gain access, and I think we start here at the back and work our way forward. In order to do that we have to remove this bar, I believe. So I'm going to put some additional bracing in the rear of the car to try to stabilize the car so that we can take this bar out. We'll add a bar here. And we're going to add a bar on the other side in the same spot, and then we'll remove that sidebar so that we have access to the firewall. Here goes the first weld of this project. And now we'll cut this bar out. Next up are these flaps here. We're going to have to weld them up. No more slits in the floor. The next thing I'd like to try to do is to get this panel to fit. It'd be nice to be able to unbolt that so we can get the motor out. We have an interference here. There's already a bend here, maybe for the old dipstick. I think we're going to try to bend this corner up and maybe we won't have to cut this panel. If we have to cut it, we will. But the first thing we're going to try to do is bend that corner. That's plenty of clearance to bolt that down, and we saved this corner. We didn't have to cut it off. Let's bolt it in and see what we got. Well, that bolts in pretty nice. Let's clean the panel up and move on. With this piece cleaned up and fitting, what I'd like to do is take this piece and cut it right about here, so that we can bolt the top part of this panel into it, and then maybe we can cut this piece off right here and weld it here, and that way we've got the turn up, and that'll help out a lot. So let's attempt that. We're going to cut right here, then we're going to cut right here. We'll try to weld this piece onto this piece, and then we'll have our turn up here. I've marked off where I want to try our first cuts. They'll probably be long, but let's try it. That's close. Let's go see what it looks like in the car. Let's see how this fits. Well, because we bent this is not right. What we're going to have to do is bend it a little bit, massage it. So after some adjustments with a hammer and a pair of pliers, this piece fits pretty good. We obviously have to make a piece for here, and we'll have to do the same thing on this side. Now let's try to make this piece fit, and we'll have to do some cutting to make that fit. So let's do that. After some persuasion, I think we have this bent the way we want it. This is almost straight up and down now, and we can run a piece of metal up here. We'll have to square this off so we can do that, but we can make this cut line here. I think we have this piece pretty well fitted. It's in a small gap right here, but I think I can weld that. I think we'll clean it up and weld it. Time to tack this in place. What was two pieces is now one. The big question is can we get the engine out if we weld this up into a complete firewall? The answer is yes, we can. In fact, we'll leave it out now while we make the remaining patches for the lower part of the firewall. We have to figure out what we're going to do with this gap. We have to leave that gap for the exhaust manifold on the right side. This gap does not look like it will be as hard as the right gap. We're going to trim this off straight. It looks like somebody cut it with a plasma cutter. Then we're going to start making patterns to fill in the holes. Here we go. We untape the pattern and we'll mark it out on a piece of 18 gauge steel and see how good we were. There's our pattern. Let's go cut it out. So let's bend it up. Here we go. It's 18 gauge steel, doesn't want to bend easy. We're going to have to bend that down further somehow. There we go. Let's see how we did. Well, this is a good seam, and that's a good seam. We're about a 1/4 inch too long. I'd rather be long than short. We can trim that off and it'll fit perfect. Now let's see how it fits. I'd say that fits pretty nice. We can tack that in. We have to remove the paint in order to make a good weld. Here we go, tacking our first piece in. Now we'll try our hand at a bigger piece. All right, let's go cut that out. Here's our latest template. We're going for a big piece this time. This is what it looks like from inside the car, and this is the way it'll look on the outside of the car. We got a nice even gap all the way across, except that when I cut the piece of metal, I flipped the pattern over, so I'm going to have to make a patch for there. But the metal itself fits very nicely. This is what it looks like outside. I'm not going to throw away this piece of metal just for that one little mistake. I can make a patch for it. Let's pull that centerpiece up nice and tight. There we go. And let's tack it. We went through the same process. We made a pattern, cut out a piece of metal, and this is the piece of metal that we came up with. That's certainly weld-inable, and that's what we're going to do next. Let's fix this mistake. Well, the hole's gone, and it looks like we've just got it tacked in like the rest of it. I think we can move on. If you don't tell, I won't tell. This is going to be a difficult pattern to make. It's got a slanted bottom and it has a slanted top. We'll start by making a strip 6 15/16 wide. With our strip taped in place, we can get the bottom angle. With the bottom cut and the piece taped back to where piece it's installed, we can mark the top, take a ruler and hold it as level as we can, and mark the bottom of that angle and go bend that. We got it clamped into our brake and we'll bend it just like it's a piece of metal. And go see what we've got. The height and the angle looks pretty good, but the pattern is crossing over our original piece, so we're going to have to trim that down. Let me show you on the outside what I mean. Because of the fold, the piece is now crossing over rather than going towards the firewall, so what we need to do is trim that. What we'll do is we'll hold the piece up into the corner as close as we can and mark it, and we'll give ourselves some room to cut, and we'll go draw a line. We've got a little too much material here, so we'll put it up here in the corner and mark it again and go cut that. With the piece cut and fitting pretty nice, we can mark this edge. It'll be a little long, we can always trim it. We'll add a piece of paper here so that we can continue this line on down, so that when it's folded, it'll go straight up. I'm certainly glad I'm doing this in paper, not metal. Now, what we can do is continue this line on down and cut that. And that piece seems to match up pretty nice. I think we can cut a piece of metal out with that. We'll look inside. It meets at the top real nice and looks pretty square. We're going to go for it. I don't have enough throat to cut this line on the bandsaw, so we're forced into using the cutoff wheel. Now we can make the remaining cuts on the bandsaw. So here's our pattern, and that matches up real nice. And this is our bend right there. So we know we got to run from this corner to this corner. 90-degree bend. And we better bend it the right way. We'll put the piece of metal in the brake, going corner to corner. And we'll start slightly before the corner because we know the bend actually takes a little metal. Lock it down and bend it. And it should fit. Let's go see what we did. Well, the height is good and the angle is right, but this angle isn't right because it slants in. We're going to have to bend it on our knee a little bit. And that's pretty darn close. Our 90-degree is bent just a little too much, so we'll have to unbend it a little bit. I like it. We got one more bend to do. If you look right here, there's a flange on the inside of the old firewall, and it's bent down a little bit. So we got to put a little bend in our piece to match that bend. So the piece is a little long right here. We can trim that off. On the inside, we have a nice seam right there. And that seam, the end of it is just a touch long. We can trim that off. But that's what we need to do, make it fit. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a line there that I drew while it was in the car. And that's a very small line. To try to cut it is difficult. I'll just use the grinder to grind to the line. We'll make one adjustment at a time. All our gaps are looking really nice, outside and inside. We've cleaned it up with a sandblaster to get rid of the scale so it's ready for paint. We have it clamped in place and ready to tack. And we'll go on and do the rest the same way until we get to the outside, and then we have to rebuild the outside wall. After repeating the process multiple times, we have the inner structure complete. It's now time to remove this outer structure and put some bracing in for the steering and brakes and rebuild it in 18 gauge steel. Out comes the outer wall. And now we'll rebuild it. This is the start of the bracing of the new firewall. We'll run from the top of the cowl down to the firewall, around, down, and over. That'll leave this space open for the steering column and the brake pedal. Here we are welding in the first brace. 5 more pieces and the framework is done. Now we'll grind these welds flat because we want to put the firewall right up against that. Here we are welding in the last of the braces. Next thing I want to do is I want to cut this flange off and put this old firewall back in to see how it fits. But before we do that, I want to do a trace of the outline with these new outriggers in there that we added. And before we do that, we have to clean this metal because it's filthy. If you don't believe it's filthy, watch this. That's paint thinner. This is just a rag. And that's what it looks like. This will give us a starting point. Now we have an outline of the old firewall. Let's cut this flange off and see how it fits. Not to cut this flange off because we've got bracing there now. We're going to find out exactly how far off we are. Let's see what we got. There's the old screw holes. The top is a little short. This side's a little long. This side is perfect. All right. We can make that work. It may look the same, but we've welded the doghouse to the bracing all the way around solid, and we're going to put the old firewall back in for a final fitment test and make any modifications to the new metal that is necessary. With the original firewall screwed in 4 different locations, we find that the doghouse is slightly smaller than the firewall. And what we're going to do is add 3/8 of an inch to all those lines, and then we'll trim it off after we weld it in. With the dimension modifications made to our new firewall, which should make the firewall too big, we'll start cutting it out. Our first piece cut out, complete. Now for the next one. Our new firewall. So now we'll clean up the sharp edges so no one gets cut. What I've done is laid our pattern over the top of the piece we just cut, and I'm going to mark the 2 screw holes here so that I can drill them and put the screws back into those holes to see how we line up. That way we'll get this piece in the exactly same place as this piece was. A couple of punch marks. Drill some holes. Cross your fingers. The screw holes line up. It goes into the car. We have overlap in all the spots we wanted overlap. Let's trace the outline. And now we'll cut to the traced line. Cross your fingers again. See how we did. That looks good. That looks good. I think we did it. All right. Well, we're at that final commitment stage. We're going to start welding it in. I got my lovely wife holding the metal tight to the brace, and we're going to tack it in. Okay, Ann, watch your eyes.
All right, I'm pushing.
All right, here we go. With the firewall spot welded in place, we needed to do all the finish welding on the doghouse. So here we go. We'll just work our way around and get it done. So after several hours of welding and grinding, this is what the outside looks like. And this is what the inside looks like. The inside is not quite as pretty because of all the penetration of the welds. I did grind it down. It'll certainly serve its purpose. The engine goes into its home with very little fuss. The engine hoist clears the firewall so we won't mar any future paint. There's clearance on the valve covers on both sides, and we have clearance for our rear exhaust. I believe we've accomplished what we set out to do. We've rebuilt the firewall and built a doghouse. You can't see the engine from inside the car anymore. If you enjoyed this video, there'll be more.